Ladies and gentlemen, the claim that the British extracted $45 trillion from India requires careful scrutiny. This figure stems from a 5% annual compound growth rate over 250 years, causing £1 in 1772 to become £200,000 by 2022. However, accounting for 1.9% average UK inflation, that £1 only becomes £100 by 2022. The $45 trillion figure also requires $9 million in annual transfers from India to Britain between 1765 to 1938, assuming a 5% growth rate. But with a more realistic 2% rate, the total becomes only $69 billion. While some British individuals like those in the East India Company grew rich from India's exports, exports do not equate to drainage since imports are paid for. Utsa Patnaik relates India's export surplus to drain, but this merits examination by economists and historians. As one Reddit comment notes, not all exports represent drain. The extent of resources flowing out of India needs careful analysis. The 1.6 trillion Indian deaths figure seems mistaken. 1 billion seems more plausible. And relating colonial India's death rate to 1920s America's 11 per 1000 rate seems doubtful. Institutions matter for development, as scholars like Asimoglu and Robinson have shown. British institutions focused on extraction rather than India's development. But India's economic decline predates the British, as falling wages from 1590 to 1870s indicate. The British did not revive Indian prosperity, with wages stagnating or dropping further in the 18th and 19th centuries. Also, British conquest was gradual, only completed by the 1820s. Linking colonialism just to British capitalism needs analysis. Democracy and press could have prevented famine, as Amartya Sen argues. Inclusive institutions spur growth, as Douglas North showed. While the British enriched themselves from India, the connection between imperialism and capitalism is complex. In summary, the $45 trillion figure seems flawed. Colonialism did not cause all of India's economic troubles, though exploitation and extractive institutions played a major role. A nuanced view of this complex history is needed. The facts do not seem to support the argument that the British looted $45 trillion from India. Here are some additional perspectives from prominent Indian historians and economists on the claim that Britain looted $45 trillion from India. Amartya Sen, Nobel Prize-winning economist, has argued that focusing on a monetary figure risks oversimplifying a complex historical relationship. The demands for compensation that are coming from India would make better sense if they were more focused on asking for help from Britain in building schools, hospitals and other facilities that would overcome the massive health crises, unequal education and other deprivations from which India still suffers. Zaria Masani, Indian historian, contends the drainage theory does not account for two-way flows between India and Britain. While a substantial drain did occur, Britain's trade surplus with India was used to pay for the huge deficits it ran with the rest of the world, and thus cannot be seen in isolation. Niall Ferguson, British economic historian, asserts that many of India's economic problems predated British rule. Long before the British came, the subcontinent was devoid of any fiscal or monetary infrastructure worthy of the name. Peasants pledged grain rather than cash as security against usurious debt. He argues focusing on a monetary figure obscures the complexity. Overall, while these experts acknowledge exploitation occurred, they caution against oversimplifying Indian and British economic history into a single monetary figure. The drain theory merits closer examination, considering two-way trade flows. India's economic challenges predate colonialism, shaped by indigenous institutions and infrastructure. The lasting impact of British rule is complex and resists facile quantification. Here are perspectives from 6 additional Indian historians and economists, including quotes, on the $45 trillion claim. Tirthankar Roy, economic historian. Roy argues that, focusing on a mind-boggling number makes for good politics but not necessarily good history. The drain theory cannot be reduced to one number. He contends the economic relationship was more complex and nuanced. Vishnupriya Gupta, historian, Gupta states that, while colonial exploitation is a fact, the drain theory ignores domestic factors in India's economic decline. We need to avoid economic reductionism when assessing the colonial impact. She believes internal Indian dynamics also contributed to economic conditions. Mihir Shah, economist, Shah says, British policies like tariffs and taxes undoubtedly drained resources, but we mustn't lose sight of the bigger picture of institutional dynamics between colonizer and colonized. He emphasizes examining broader institutional interactions. Pramit Chowdhury, economist, Chowdhury argues, India was already deindustrializing when the British arrived. Britain erected trade barriers and policies that enriched the metropole, but colonialism isn't the sole explanation for the drain. He points to pre-existing economic trends in India. Arvind Panagaria, economist, Panagaria states, was there a resource drain from India? Unquestionably. But Prof. Patnaik's specific conclusions are challenged by other economists and historians who dispute the data, assumptions and methodology. He believes the specific drain calculations require further scrutiny. Gurcharan Das, author, Das says, exploitation occurred and policies hampered India's economy, but the scale of transferred resources remains opaque. We must resist glib theories and be guided by scholarly nuance. He emphasizes scholarly rigor over simplistic theories. In summary, these experts recognize exploitation but advise examining the complexity of colonial economic impacts, pre-existing Indian conditions, two-way flows, and nuanced institutional dynamics beyond monetized drain estimates.